Greetings all! In the mid-1950s, someone started to wonder what the realistic ramifications would be of atomic warfare. Although the Korean War had just demonstrated that, well, the immediate post-war ideals that any conventional war would be irrelevant because folks would just drop A-bombs on enemy cities instead of fighting, were perhaps a bit divorced from reality, there very definitely was a strain of thinking that atomic warheads would still be used on the battlefield, if not on cities. If so, a safe way of gathering radiation data from contaminated areas was desired, and an obvious way of doing this would be to send an unmanned vehicle into the area. Now, given that autonomous driving wasn't quite up to the required level to do this in the 1950s, a form of a remote control would be required. However, there was a further thought. If the vehicle in question happened to go to the far side of the contaminated zone, which wasn't expected to be too big, given the sizes of atomic warheads at the time, it might encounter forward enemy positions, such as gun emplacements or minefields. Thus, making the vehicle in question an armoured one was indicated, and well, there's little more armoured than a tank. Further, since a tank tended to come with a cannon, why not enable the tank to shoot at suitable targets while it was at it? If nothing else, you had recon by fire. As a result, an M48A1, registration number 9Alpha 4254, normally found residing in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, found itself kitted out for a remote operation at the Aberdeen Proving Ground, October 1956. Now, the idea of radio-controlled tanks goes back to the Soviet teletanks of the 1930s, limited though they were and controlled by pneumatics. The US Army wasn't entirely new to remote control either. As early as the M6 Heavy and the T-23 Medium in World War II, the tank could be controlled by an individual with a control box, standing some distance outside the tank. Now, the intent was more to allow for easy maneuver in tight spaces, like parking in a motor pool, with the driver having the outside view of whatever the tank was around. And as such, it was a tethered system. The reason it was easy to do it in the first place with those tanks was that the tanks in question had electric motors. This M48, however, was an entirely different kettle of fish. The experiment was to be conducted out of line of sight of the tank, relying on cameras and a radio television system to provide the situational awareness, and radio control instead of a tether. Still, even this wasn't an entirely new concept to the US. The Interstate TDR unmanned aircraft had a television camera transmitting to a controller in a chase aircraft. 6 major components would be needed for the entire system. The first, well, that was the tank itself, already described. The second, the control vehicle, and in this case, a 5-ton truck. Third and fourth, the television transmitting equipment and the remote control equipment in the tank. Fifth and sixth were the television receiving equipment and remote control equipment in the truck. The television system was categorized as medium quality, and it was a commercial TV system developed to a Signal Corps contract. It ran eventually on the standard vehicle 24-volt system. On the tank, there were 2 identical cameras. They were both about 17 pounds and give or take a foot long. One was mounted in the driver's periscope. This was fitted with a wide-angle lens, providing a 90-degree field of vision. The lens also came with an iris control for brightness. The second camera was the one which would be used for the gunner's position, and thus also shooting. Instead of a wide-angle lens, it came equipped with an adjustable zoom lens, and this would be used for range finding, and I'll come back to that. Now, being a commercial television set, it was necessary to equip the setup with an inverter to take the tank's 24-volt DC electrical power system and turn it into a 120-volt AC system. This is probably the single biggest part of the whole thing, at about 170 pounds, which must have been interesting to get into the tank's hatch. The set itself needed another 50-pound power unit to distribute the appropriate electricity to the 53-pound master control unit, which included vacuum tubes and circuit boards, the 2 cameras, and the 42-pound transmitter. Finally, there was a 1-pound disc and cone omnidirectional antenna on a mast. The control equipment was an entirely separate setup and required less unique equipment. it received its signals through the standard R108 GRC radio. It then took the signals received, put them into a decoder, which then turned the instructions into electrical impulses which got sent to the servo motors. The servos applied force to the various controls of the vehicle. Fortunately, as the M48 used an automatic transmission, gear shifting wasn't too much of a problem beyond forwards or reverse. Finally, as range finding was going to be done with the camera, a new ballistic computer had to be installed to convert the rangefinder information into the appropriate super elevation for AP, HVAP or HE rounds of the 90mm gun and the caliber 30 of the coaxial MG. Things were a bit easier to install in the truck. After all, it was bigger for the single operator to use. Now, the first thing he would see would be the two monitors to view the UHF sent television signals. One was a 14-inch screen and the other a 10-inch screen, although it may just have been a matter of what was available, the reports don't say. There was also an adjustment monitor, which had a main 7-inch screen and an oscilloscope. The receiver and decoder were next to each other, but the power unit again was not small. At 180 pounds, it also converted the 24-volt DC input to just under 120 volts AC. The whole thing connected to the directional Yagi antenna out top. And now that of course was just for the camera system to receive the information. To send signals out to the tank required two custom-built control panels and a control handle. Now the handle itself was lifted straight from an M48's commander's position. One control panel was the driving control panel and the other for the gun and camera. A very big lever on the right side of the gun and camera panel was the selector for controlling the hull or the turret. So in other words, this particular tank could drive or it could shoot, but it couldn't do both at the same time. But it did mean that only one operator was required, and it also simplified the radio requirements. No attempt was made to try to fit a system which would allow two operators to do two things at once. An encoder then took the signals from the controls, turned them into something the standard Army RT-66 GRC radio could transmit, and then sent them over the airwaves to the tank. So, with everything installed within a couple of months, off to the testing course they went. The first problem they discovered was that driving a tank through a single medium quality television screen wasn't easy. If you were driving along a well-defined road, well, okay, there was no issue, but cross-country, they tended to find obstacles like ditches by falling into them. There was a lack of depth perception. Further, the signal definition was such that at 25 miles an hour, they would have about 5 seconds between a 3-foot-high wall becoming distinguishable on the monitor and actually hitting it. The report is not descriptive as to how they came about this rather specific example. The second thing they discovered was that the television signal often could transmit further than the remote control signal. On a good day with no obstacles, the television would transmit some 3,700 yards. Half that if there were woods, and if there was a lot of precipitation, such as ice on the trees, knock an additional 400 yards off. The remote control range, however, was about 2,800 yards, almost a half mile shorter than the TV in good conditions. The third thing they discovered was that it was pretty difficult to know where the tank actually was. Unless the operator happened to recognize some landmark off in the distance of the medium quality television broadcast, he was pretty much driving blindly. Now, given that they were on the Perryman test course, the operators were actually fairly familiar with the landmarks, though it might be considered that such a familiarity might not obtain on a German battlefield. Fourthly, they needed to use stronger cables between the servos and tank controls. The cables to both the steering linkage and the brakes snapped once each. Finally, driving into the low sun was impossible, as the direct sunlight would permanently damage the camera's Vidicon tubes, whatever those were. Gunnery presented its own problems. Now, in theory, the way it would work would be as follows. Operator would drive the tank to wherever he thought he had line of sight to something worth shooting at. He would stop, flip the big lever to control the gun, and traverse over to the target area. When the target was identified, it then had to be ranged. Now, bear in mind, the standard mechanism for range finding in the US Army at the time was a stereoscopic rangefinder, something which obviously cannot be done with the use of a single camera. So instead, They worked off the basis of a size of a known target. And I have a whole other video on range value, by the way. The gunner's camera comes with a superimposed box and a range scale above it. Now, this idea isn't unique. The idea of framing a target with a box to determine range has been on a range of vehicles. The 8 Panzer Canon, Leopard 1, to even the M1A2 SEP has it as a backup on the CITV. What's different in this case, though, is that instead of adjusting the sides of the box to frame the target, the operator adjusted the zoom on the camera so that the target would fit the stationary box. This adjustment also rolled the range scale readout and simultaneously drove the ballistic computer to adjust the super elevation accordingly. They left a few M48 targets downrange, and the range finding system was found to work very accurately to about 2 to 3%, well within tolerance. Of course, that was with perfect knowledge of the target's size. The whole worm thing gets a bit more complicated if you're not entirely sure how big the object you're ranging is. The main mechanical problem was that the zoom lens in question was only good to range to about 1,000 yards, which of course is well below the requirements of a conventional system. Now that of course could be easily fixed by just putting a more powerful zoom lens on the camera, but for the purposes of testing the concept, this wasn't necessary. The program of firing included an even 100 rounds. 90 were standard AP in order to determine accuracy and the effect of shock firing on the system, 5 were HE and 5 more were HVAP. Accuracy wasn't great. Indeed, it exceeded the minimum CONOC standards by a factor of 2, with a horizontal average error of 0.31 of a mil and a vertical of 0.28. Obviously, the rounds were manually loaded for this test, although M48 autoloaders were being investigated. Well, that'll be the subject of a different video. The shock of firing didn't actually turn out to be all that much of a problem, though. Only one tube on the transmitter went out. Another problem they found, though, was that the obscuration caused by firing against the relatively low-resolution camera tended to prohibit observing fall of shot for anything except high explosive. Tracking tests weren't fantastic either. The operator could keep on a moving target from speeds of 5 to 40 miles an hour from 73 to 83% of the time. They had sensitivity issues. The CONOC standard was 100% of the time. The single biggest problem, though, was in finding the targets. The standard from CONOC was that a tank had to lay on a target within 15 seconds. In practice, with this vehicle, it was between 20 to 30 seconds, and the main reason was contrast. Every time the tank's gun sight camera moved from a predominantly bright background to a predominantly dark one, the operator had to stop what he was doing, adjust the display, adjust himself to the new display, and then resume. In the tracking test, this also meant that the original smaller target couldn't be used. They needed to use a 7.5-foot square target instead. Now, that said, overall, as a proof of concept, the tank worked well enough. Now, obviously, camera technology would have to improve. And indeed, there were a slew of television system failures. Some seem to have been manufacturing defects, and some were simply issues of trying to use a relatively delicate system in the decidedly non-delicate environment of a tank. The remote control equipment, however, was a little bit more reliable. Now, obviously, this system didn't go any further for many years, although it did return in the form of the XM1060 Robat in the 1980s, the Robotic Obstacle Breaching Assault Tank. Think of it a bit like an ABV on an M60A3 hull with an optional manned or remote control. It was remotely controlled by fiber optic up to 1 kilometer or FM radio up to 2 kilometers. It was trialled in 1986 and failed pretty miserably. The idea still hung around and was eventually fielded in the form of Panther, later Panther 1. This was a somewhat less ambitious vehicle with the hull of an M60 and mine rollers up front. Now, I never saw one in the flesh, but apparently it was used in the Balkans. I did, however, find its successor in Iraq, and I took this photo of the M1 Abrams Panther, sometimes also known as Panther 2, in 2004. Recently, there has been movement towards turning the ABV into a robotic system, but we'll see where things go. So anyway, that is the story of the 1950s attempt at an FPV tank. Hope you found it interesting and informative. Oh, by the way, I keep forgetting to mention this. People are commenting that the subscription thing isn't notifying them. Have a look at where the thing says you are subscribed on YouTube. Click the down arrow and see does it say personalized Or does it say all? If it says personalized, that's probably why you're not getting the notifications. Anyway, details aside. Again, hope you found it all interesting and informative, and I will talk to you on the next one. Take care.